3 years ago, my dad told me I'd never be responsible enough to drive. He said I was too reckless, too distracted, too much like my mother who'd walked out on us when I was 12. The morning of my driving test, he offered to check my car one last time to make sure everything was perfect. I thought it was his way of finally believing in me. Instead, he cut my brake lines and nearly killed me. But what he didn't know was that the DMV examiner moonlighted as a mechanic and had been secretly recording everything. Now my dad's business is ruined. I own my own auto shop and the whole town knows exactly what kind of father tries to destroy his daughter's future. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It started on a Tuesday morning in Cedar Falls, Oregon, one of those crisp June days when the mountains looked close enough to touch, and the air smelled like pine needles and fresh coffee from the diner downtown. I remember standing in our driveway at exactly 7:15, keys trembling in my hand, staring at the silver Honda Civic that would either give me freedom or crush my dreams. The driving test was scheduled for 9:30, and I'd been preparing for this moment since my 16th birthday 18 months ago. My name is Chloe Parker, and at 17 I was the only senior at Riverside High who still didn't have a license. Not because I couldn't drive. I'd been driving since I was 14, helping my dad David move cars around our family auto repair shop, Parker Auto Repair, which sat on the corner of Main and Cedar like a grease-stained monument to 3 generations of Parker men who could fix anything with wheel. The problem wasn't my skills behind the wheel. The problem was my father. Every time I'd scheduled a driving test over the past year and a half, something would go wrong. The first time, Dad discovered a mysterious engine problem with my car the night before. The second time, he needed me to work an emergency shift at the shop, because Tyler, my older brother, had called in sick with what turned out to be a hangover. The third time, the car's registration had mysteriously expired, and Dad claimed he'd forgotten to renew it. Each cancellation came with the same lecture about responsibility, about how I wasn't ready, about how driving was a privilege that had to be earned through more than just parallel parking and 3-point turns. That Tuesday morning felt different. Dad had been unusually supportive the week leading up to the test. He'd even taken me out for practice drives, something he'd refused to do before, claiming I needed to learn from a professional instructor. Miss Anderson from the driving school had been patient enough, but his nervous energy and constant foot hovering over the passenger brake had made me more anxious than confident. When Dad offered to give me some real-world practice, I'd been grateful. We'd driven through downtown Cedar Falls, practiced highway merging, even worked on parallel parking between the delivery trucks behind Sullivan's garage. Jake Sullivan owned that garage, and he'd wave at us through his office window each time we practiced in his lot. Jake was probably 25, with dark hair that always looked like he'd just run his hands through it, and coveralls that somehow made him look more put together than most people in suits. He'd graduated from Riverside High, about 7 years before me, and everyone in town knew his story. Full scholarship to Oregon State for mechanical engineering, graduated summa cum laude, turned down job offers from Tesla and Ford, to come back home and take over his father's garage, when the old man had a heart attack. Some people called it noble, others called it a waste of potential. I called it admirable, though I'd never said that out loud. The morning of my driving test, I walked around my Honda Civic with the checklist Mr. Anderson had drilled into my head. Tires properly inflated, check. Headlights working, check. Turn signals functioning, check. Mirrors adjusted, check. Seatbelt operational, check. I popped the hood and glanced at the engine bay. Not that I knew enough to spot anything obviously wrong, but Dad had always said a responsible driver should at least look. Everything appeared normal to my untrained eye. Dad emerged from the house carrying 2 travel mugs of coffee, one for each of us. He was dressed in his usual work clothes, navy blue coveralls with Parker Auto Repair, embroidered over the chest pocket and his name stitched below it in red thread. At 43, he still had the broad shoulders and steady hands of someone who'd spent his life working with tools, though the lines around his eyes had deepened since Mom left. His dark hair was showing more gray at the temples, and he'd developed a habit of rubbing his chin when he was thinking about something he didn't want to discuss. "Big day," he said, handing me the coffee. His smile seemed genuine, reaching his eyes in a way that had become rare over the past few years. "You ready for this?" I took the coffee gratefully, letting the warmth seep into my hands. "As ready as I'll ever be. Thanks for all the practice drives this week, it really helped." He nodded, sipping his coffee and studying my car with the practiced eye of someone who'd been diagnosing automotive problems since before I was born. "You know, I should probably take one more look under the hood, make sure everything's perfect. Don't want any surprises during the test." Something in his tone made me pause, but I couldn't identify what it was. Maybe it was the way he said surprises, like he was expecting them, or maybe it was just my nerves making me paranoid. I'd been dreaming about getting my license for so long that every delay felt like a conspiracy, even when logic told me otherwise. "Dad, we checked everything yesterday," I said, "and this morning, the car's fine." "Humor me," he replied, already moving toward the front of the car. "5 minutes, then we'll head to the DMV, and you can show that examiner what a parker can do behind the wheel." I watched him lift the hood and disappear behind it, hearing the familiar sounds of someone who knew their way around an engine. Metallic clinks, the soft whoosh of him checking fluid levels, the gentle thud of him testing connections. These were the sounds of my childhood, the background music of growing up in a family where cars weren't just transportation but a way of life. Parker Auto Repair had been my grandfather's shop before it was my dad's, and everyone expected it would be Tyler's someday, even though my brother showed more interest in partying than carbureting. I'd been the one hanging around the garage since I could walk, handing Dad tools and asking questions about how everything worked. I'd been the one who could diagnose a misfiring engine by sound alone, who knew the difference between a brake squeal and a belt squeal, who could change oil faster than most of Dad's employees. But I was also the one who'd never be taken seriously because I was a girl, because I had dreams that extended beyond the town limits, because I'd inherited what Dad called my mother's restless spirit. "There we go," Dad said, lowering the hood with a satisfied thud. "Everything looks good. Better than good, actually. This car should run like a dream for your test." He wiped his hands on a shop rag he'd pulled from his pocket, and I noticed a smudge of something dark on his fingers. Oil, probably, or grease. Nothing unusual for someone who spent their days elbow deep in engine. He checked his watch, a simple black digital model that had survived countless encounters with motor oil and brake fluid. "We should head out soon," he said. "Traffic might be heavier than usual with the summer construction on Pine Ridge." I finished my coffee and grabbed my purse from the porch, double-checking that I had my learner's permit, the car's registration and the insurance card. My hands were steadier now, the morning caffeine helping to settle my nerves. This was it. Today was the day I'd finally join the ranks of licensed drivers, the day I'd stop depending on friends for rides, or my dad's sporadic willingness to let me borrow a car. The drive to the Oak Street DMV took 15 minutes through downtown Cedar Falls, past the diner where my friend Rachel Kim worked summer shifts, past the library where I'd spent countless hours researching colleges in places far from Oregon, past the park where I'd learned to ride a bike and had my first kiss, and spent senior skip day, wondering what came next. Dad drove his own truck, a diesel Ford that rumbled like distant thunder while I followed in my Honda. The plan was for him to wait in the DMV parking lot while I took my test, then we'd celebrate with lunch at the diner if I passed. The DMV building was a single-story brick structure that had probably been considered modern in 1987, but now just looked tired. The parking lot was already half full with nervous teenagers and their equally nervous parents, along with the usual mix of people renewing registrations and updating addresses. I parked in a spot near the building entrance, and Dad pulled up beside me. "Remember what we practiced," he said through his open window. "Check your mirrors, signal early, and don't let the examiner rattle you. They're just doing their job." I nodded, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "What if I fail?" "You won't," he said, and something in his voice made me look at him more closely. There was an odd certainty there, like he knew something I didn't. "But if you do, we'll figure it out. There's always next time." Inside the DMV, I joined the line for road tests, and tried not to think about all the ways things could go wrong. The woman behind the counter was friendly enough, checking my paperwork and explaining the process. I'd be paired with an examiner who would ride along during a 20-minute drive through a predetermined route that included residential streets, a business district, highway merging and parallel parking. Standard stuff that I'd practiced dozens of times. Chloe Park. The voice came from behind me, and I turned to see a man in his mid-20s wearing a DMV uniform shirt and carrying a clipboard. It took me a moment to recognize him because he looked so different in official clothes, but it was Jake Sullivan from the garage. "Jake," I said, probably sounding more surprised than I should have. "You work here?" He smiled, and I noticed he had the kind of smile that made you feel like you were in on a secret. "Part-time," he explained. "I'm a certified driving examiner. Helps pay for some of the equipment upgrades at the garage. Small towns, you know, everyone wears multiple hats." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Jake had watched me practice parallel parking in his lot. He'd seen me handle the car confident. If I had to have an examiner, at least it was someone who already knew I wasn't completely hopeless behind the wheel. "Ready to do this?" he asked, glancing at his clipboard. "We'll start with a quick vehicle safety check, then head out for the road portion." We walked out to my Honda together, and Jake went through the standard pre-test routine. Headlights, turn signals, brake lights, hazard lights, everything worked perfectly. He checked that I could identify the parking brake, the windshield wipers, the defroster controls, all good. Then he climbed into the passenger seat, clipboard in hand, and I settled behind the wheel. "Whenever you're ready," he said. "We'll start by exiting the parking lot and turning right onto Oak Street." I started the engine, adjusted my mirrors one final time, and carefully backed out of the parking space. The car felt exactly as it had during all our practice drives. Smooth, responsive, reliable. I'd driven this route with Miss Anderson multiple times, and I knew every turn, every stop sign, every potential hazard. This was going to be fine. We made it through the residential section without any problems. I maintained proper following distance, came to complete stops at stop signs, checked for pedestrians at crosswalks. Jake made occasional notes on his clipboard but didn't say much, which I took as a good sign. No news was good news during a driving test. The business district went equally well. I navigated around a delivery truck, yielded properly to oncoming traffic when making a left turn, and kept my speed steady, despite the distraction of seeing my dad's truck parked outside the hardware store. He must have decided to run errands while waiting for my test to finish. "Now we'll head up to the highway for the merging exercise," Jake said, as we approached the on-ramp. "Just merge into traffic when it's safe, drive for about 2 miles, then take the next exit." I signaled, checked my mirrors, and accelerated up the ramp. The Honda responded smoothly, gaining speed as we approached the highway. I glanced left, saw a gap in traffic, and prepared to merge. That's when I pressed the brake pedal to fine-tune my speed, and my foot went straight to the floor. No resistance, no stopping power, nothing. "Jake," I said, trying to keep my voice calm even as panic flooded my system. "The brakes aren't working." He looked up from his clipboard, saw my expression, and immediately understood the situation. "Okay," he said, his voice steady and professional. "Don't panic. Use the parking brake, but gently. Can you downshift?" I pulled the parking brake, feeling the car slow but not stop. The Honda had an automatic transmission, so downshifting wasn't really an option. We were still gaining speed as we approached the merge point, with traffic flowing at 65 miles per hour beside us. "There's a runaway truck ramp, about half a mile ahead," Jake said, pointing to a sandy uphill path designed for exactly this kind of emergency. "Can you make it that far?" "I think so," I said, though my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I steered onto the highway, using the parking brake and engine braking to control our speed as much as possible. Cars honked as they swerved around us, but I managed to stay in the right lane and limp toward the emergency ramp. We rolled up the sandy incline and came to a stop about 50 yards from the highway. I sat there for a moment, hands still gripping the wheel, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Are you okay?" Jake asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. He was already pulling out his phone, presumably to call for a tow truck, and probably to report the incident to the DM. I fumbled for my own phone to call my dad, but Jake held up a hand. "Before you call anyone," he said, "I want to take a look under the car. Brake failure in a vehicle this new isn't normal. Mind if I check something?" I nodded again, and we both got out of the car. Jake walked around to the front and crouched down, peering under the engine bay. I heard him mutter something under his breath, then he stood up with an expression I couldn't read. "Chloe," he said carefully, "when was the last time someone worked on this car?" "This morning," I said. "My dad checked everything before we left for the test." "Why?" Jake pulled out his phone again, but this time he opened the camera app. "I'm going to document this," he said. "Your brake lines have been cut. This wasn't an accident or normal wear. Someone deliberately sabotaged your car." The words hit me like cold water. "That's impossible," I said. "Who would do that?" But even as I asked the question, I was thinking about my dad's odd behavior that morning, his insistence on checking the car one more time, his certainty that I wouldn't fail the test, the dark smudge on his hands after he'd worked under the hood. Jake was taking photos of the severed brake lines, his phone camera capturing evidence of what he clearly considered a crime. "Chloe," he said gently, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Who had access to your car last night and this morning?" I stood there in the afternoon sun, listening to the distant sound of highway traffic, and felt my world shift on its axis, because there was only one person who'd had unsupervised access to my car. Only one person who'd insisted on that final inspection. Only one person who'd been sabotaging my driving tests for 18 months, and I'd been too trusting to see it. My father had tried to kill me rather than let me get my license, and Jake Sullivan, my driving examiner, had the silence stretched between Jake and me, as the weight of his questions settled in. Highway traffic continued flowing past the runaway ramp, oblivious to the fact that my entire understanding of my family had just shattered like windshield glass. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold, despite the warm June afternoon. "My dad," I whispered, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. Only my dad had access to the car. Jake's expression softened with something that looked like sympathy mixed with professional concern. He continued photographing the brake lines from multiple angles, his movements deliberate and methodical. "I'm sorry, Chloe. I know this isn't what you want to hear, but we need to document everything properly. This is attempted vehicular homicide." The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Attempted vehicular homicide, not just sabotage or a prank gone wrong, but an actual attempt on my life. I sank down onto a nearby boulder, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Everything from the past 18 months began clicking into place like puzzle pieces. I'd been too naive to connect the mysterious engine problems that only appeared the night before scheduled driving tests, the convenient emergencies that required my presence at the shop, the expired registration that Dad had supposedly forgotten to renew. None of it had been coincidence or forgetfulness. It had all been calculated, deliberate obstruction designed to keep me from getting my license. But why? That was the question that made my chest feel tight and my breathing shallow. Why would my own father want to prevent me from driving? What was he so afraid of? Jake finished his photography and called 911, speaking in calm, professional tones about brake line sabotage and the need for both police and a tow truck. While he handled the logistics, I pulled out my own phone with trembling fingers. 23 missed calls from Dad, along with a string of text messages that had started worried and escalated to frantic. "Where are you? Test should be over by now." "Called DMV. They said you left with examiner." "Everything okay? Chloe, answer your phone." Getting worried. "This isn't funny. Call me back now." The progression from concern to anger felt familiar. It was the same pattern Dad followed whenever he felt like he was losing control of a situation. When I was younger, I'd interpreted it as protective love. Now I wondered if it had always been something darker. Officer Martinez arrived first, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. Jake walked her through what had happened, showing her the severed brake lines, and explaining the circumstances of the discovery. She took her own photographs and asked me detailed questions about who had access to the vehicle and when. "Has your father ever been violent toward you or other family members?" she asked gently. I shook my head automatically, then paused. "Not physically violent, but he's very controlling. He's been finding reasons to cancel my driving tests for over a year." "Can you think of any reason he might not want you to have a license?" That question opened up a flood of memories I'd been suppressing. Dad's increasing agitation whenever I talked about college application. His insistence that I didn't need to look at schools outside Oregon because we had perfectly good universities right here. His suggestion that maybe I should take a gap year and help full-time at the shop before making any big decisions about my future. I'd always attributed his resistance to normal parental worry about letting go, but what if it was something more calculating? What if he'd realized that a driver's license meant independence, and independence meant I might actually leave Cedar Falls for college like I'd been planning? I think he's afraid I'll leave town, I told Officer Martinez. I've been accepted to colleges in California and Washington. He doesn't want me to go. She nodded, making notes in her report. We'll need to interview your father obviously. Is there somewhere safe you can stay tonight? Family, friend, relative, somewhere he can't access your vehicle, or potentially harm you. The question made the situation feel suddenly real and immediate. I couldn't go home. The man who'd raised me, who'd taught me how to change a tire and check the oil, who'd read me bedtime stories and helped with homework, had tried to kill me rather than let me drive away from his control. I can stay with my friend Rachel, I said. Her family won't mind. Jake, who'd been quietly listening to my conversation with the police, stepped forward. Officer Martinez, there's something else you should know. I've been working on cars since I was 12, and I've never seen brake lines cut this cleanly. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't random vandalism or amateur sabotage. This was precision work. The implication hung in the air between us. David Parker, master mechanic with 30 years of experience, would know exactly how to disable a car's brakes in a way that would cause failure at highway speed. He would know that cutting the lines partially might cause gradual brake loss that could be detected during pre-trip inspection, but severing them completely would create catastrophic failure at the worst possible moment. My phone rang again. Dad's contact photo filled the screen, a picture I'd taken of him last Christmas when he was actually smiling, grease smudged on his cheek and a new tool set unwrapped on the table behind him. I stared at the image for several rings before declining the call. Immediately a text message followed. Chloe, I'm coming to find you. This has gone on long enough. I showed the message to Officer Martinez, and her expression grew more serious. We need to locate your father before he locates you. Do you know where he might go to look for you? The DMV first, probably, then Rachel's house, since that's where I usually go when I'm upset. Maybe the garage where we practiced driving. She radioed for patrol units to watch those locations, and arranged for a protective detail to escort me to Rachel's house. The surreal nature of the situation kept hitting me in waves. 3 hours ago, I'd been a nervous teenager about to take her driving test. Now I was under police protection from my own father. The tow truck arrived and loaded my Honda onto its flatbed. Watching it get hauled away felt like losing the last symbol of the independence I'd been fighting so hard to achieve. Jake rode with me in Officer Martinez's patrol car to Rachel's house, continuing to document details and take notes that might be relevant for the investigation. I keep thinking I should have seen this coming, I told him as we drove through downtown Cedar Falls. All those canceled tests, all those excuses. How could I have been so blind? Because he's your father, Jake said simply. You trusted him, because that's what daughters do. That's what families are supposed to be built on. This isn't your fault, Chloe. Rachel Kim lived in a modest 2-story house on Maple Street with her parents and younger brother. The Kims had moved to Cedar Falls from Seattle when Rachel was in middle school, and Miss Kim had quickly established herself as the unofficial neighborhood mom, who fed any teenager who looked hungry, and asked thoughtful questions about college plans. When Officer Martinez explained the situation, Mrs. Kim immediately insisted I could stay as long as necessary. Your father did what? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rachel said when we finally had a moment alone in her bedroom, she was still wearing her work uniform from the diner, smelling faintly of coffee and bacon grease. Chloe, that's insane. Why would he try to hurt you? I'd been asking myself the same question for hours without finding a satisfactory answer. I think he's terrified of me leaving. But Jake's right. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. He's been planning this for months, maybe longer. Rachel sat down on her bed, shaking her head in disbelief. Remember sophomore year when you got that internship offer at the marine biology lab in Newport? The one that would have looked amazing on college applications. I nodded. The internship had been a dream opportunity, a chance to work with real researchers studying ocean ecosystems. I'd been selected from over 100 applicants, and the program coordinator had called me personally to offer the position. Your dad found some excuse for why you couldn't do it. Rachel continued. Something about needing you at the shop for the summer. At the time I thought he was just being overprotective, but now it looked like part of a pattern. Every opportunity that might have strengthened my college applications, or given me experience outside Cedar Falls, had been quietly sabotaged. The marine biology internship, the summer journalism program at Portland State, the leadership conference in Salem that I'd won a scholarship to attend. There had always been a reason why I couldn't participate. Always some family or shop emergency that required my presence. He's been isolating me, I realized out loud, keeping me from building the kind of resume that would get me into competitive schools far from home. I thought it was bad luck or poor timing, but he's been orchestrating it. My phone buzzed with another text from Dad. Talk to police. They won't tell me where you are. This is ridiculous, Chloe. Come home so we can discuss this like adults. The casual tone, as if attempted murder was just a family disagreement that could be resolved over dinner, made my stomach turn. I showed the message to Rachel, who immediately grabbed her laptop. We need to document everything, she said. Every canceled opportunity, every excuse, every time he's interfered with your plans. If this goes to court, you'll need evidence of the pattern. For the next several hours we worked together to create a timeline of my father's interference. The list was longer than I'd realized, and more systematic than I'd wanted to believe. Summer programs canceled due to shop emergencies that never materialized. College prep courses delayed because of family obligations that turned out to be fabricated. Even my part-time job at the library had been cut short when Dad decided I needed to work more hours at the garage. Mrs. Kim brought us sandwiches and tea, her expression growing more troubled as she overheard pieces of our conversation. Chloe, honey, she said finally, I want you to know that you're welcome here for as long as you need. No one should have to fear their own family. Around 9 o'clock, Officer Martinez called to update me on the investigation. We've located your father at Parker Auto Repair. He's agreed to come in for questioning tomorrow morning. In the meantime, we're posting a patrol unit on this street tonight, just as a precaution. Has he said anything about what happened? He's claiming the brake line failure was accidental, possibly caused by road damage or normal wear. But the evidence doesn't support that theory. Jake Sullivan's photographs clearly show clean cuts made with professional tools. After Officer Martinez hung up, I sat in Rachel's bedroom staring at my phone and trying to process the fact that my father was being questioned by police as a suspect in my attempted murder. The man who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped with my algebra homework was sitting in an interrogation room, probably in handcuffs, lying about trying to kill me. I keep thinking about my mom, I told Rachel. She left when I was 12. And Dad always said it was because she was selfish and couldn't handle family responsibility. But what if she left because she recognized something dangerous about him? What if she tried to take me with her and he wouldn't let her? Rachel looked up from her lap. Have you ever tried to contact her? Dad said she didn't want contact with us. He said she'd started a new life and moved on. But now I'm wondering if that was just another lie. The thought of my mother somewhere out there, possibly having spent the last 5 years wondering about me and unable to reach me because of my father's manipulation, made my chest ache with a different kind of grief. How many lies had I been living with? How many relationships had been severed to keep me isolated and dependent? My phone rang around 10:30, unknown number with a local area code. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe to accept the call. Chloe? The voice was familiar but took me a moment to play. Tyler, my older brother, calling from what sounded like a noisy bar or restaurant. Tyler? How did you get this number? Rachel's mom gave it to me. I heard about what happened with Dad in the car. Jesus, Chloe. Are you okay? I hadn't talked to Tyler in weeks. At 21 he was supposedly learning the business side of Parker Auto Repair, but mostly he seemed to spend his time drinking with friends and avoiding actual responsibility. We'd never been particularly close, partially because of the 3-year age gap, and partially because he'd inherited Dad's dismissive attitude toward my automotive interests. "I'm fine, physically," I said, "but Tyler, did you know about Dad sabotaging my driving test?" There was a long pause, filled with background noise and what sounded like Tyler moving to a quieter location. "I suspected something," he said finally. The excuses were getting pretty elaborate, but I figured it was just Dad being Dad. You know, overprotective and controlling. This goes way beyond overprotective. He tried to kill me today. Don't be dramatic, Chloe. Dad wouldn't actually hurt you. He probably just wanted to scare you a little, make you think twice about rushing off to college. The casual dismissal of what had happened made me furious. Tyler, my brake lines were completely severed. If Jake hadn't been there to help me find the runaway ramp, I would have crashed into highway traffic at 65 miles per hour. That's not a scare tactic. That's attempted murder. Jake? Jake Sullivan. What does he have to do with this? I explained about Jake being my driving examiner and discovering the sabotage. Tyler listened without interrupting, and I could hear his perspective shifting as the details sank in. "Shit," he said finally. "I had no idea it was that serious. Dad's been weird lately, more controlling than usual, but I thought it was just stress about the shop finances." "What do you mean, shop finances?" "We've been losing customers to that new chain garage over in Riverside. Dad's been talking about expanding, maybe opening a second location, but that would require a loan. I think he's been counting on having both of us working full-time to make the numbers work." Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Dad hadn't just been afraid of losing me to college. He'd been planning a future that required my unpaid labor to be financially viable. My independence wasn't just an emotional threat to his control, it was a direct threat to his business expansion plans. "Tyler, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Has Dad ever talked about Mom, about why she really left?" There was another long pause. "He made me promise never to tell you." "Tell me what?" "Mom didn't just leave, Chloe. Dad had her car sabotaged too. Different method, but same result. She was trying to take you with her, and he couldn't let that happen. So he made sure her car broke down on the way to pick you up from school. By the time she got it fixed, he'd already filed for emergency custody and convinced a judge that she was unstable and dangerous." The room spun around me. Rachel grabbed my arm, steadying me, as the full scope of my father's manipulation became clear. He'd been using automotive sabotage as a tool of control for years. My mother hadn't abandoned me. She'd been prevented from taking me to safety. "Where is she now?" I whispered. "Seattle. She's been trying to contact you for years, but Dad intercepts everything. Letters, emails, phone calls. He has your social media monitored somehow. She doesn't even know if you're okay." I hung up the phone and immediately called Officer Martinez. If my father had a history of using vehicle sabotage to control family members, that changed everything about today's incident. This wasn't an isolated act of desperation. This was an escalation of a long-term pattern of abuse. The police needed to know that David Parker was far more dangerous than anyone had realized, and I needed to find my mother before he figured out a way to hurt her too. Officer Martinez arrived at the Kim house within 20 minutes of my call about Tyler's revelation. She sat in the living room with me, Rachel and Mrs. Kim, taking detailed notes as I repeated everything my brother had told me about my mother's attempted escape and my father's history of vehicle sabotage. "This changes the scope of our investigation significantly," she said, closing her notepad. "What started as one incident of attempted vehicular assault now looks like a pattern of domestic abuse involving multiple victims over several years. We'll need to contact Seattle PD and see if your mother ever filed any reports about her car being tampered with." Miss Kim leaned forward from her position on the couch. "Officer, what kind of protection can you provide for Chloe? If her father has been planning this level of control for years, he's not going to just accept that she's escaped his influence." "We're treating this as an active threat situation," Officer Martinez replied. Mr. Parker is currently being held for questioning, but unless we can prove premeditation, he'll likely be released on bail within 48 hours. Chloe, I strongly recommend that you consider filing for a restraining order first thing Monday morning. The thought of needing legal protection from my own father felt surreal, but everything about the past 24 hours had shattered my understanding of normal family relationships. I nodded, trying to project more confidence than I felt. After Officer Martinez left, I borrowed Rachel's laptop and did something I should have done years ago. I searched for my mother online. It took nearly an hour of digging through social media profiles and public records, but eventually I found her, Linda Chen Parker, now Linda Chen Martinez, living in Seattle and working as a nurse at Swedish Medical Center. Her Facebook profile was private, but her profile picture showed a woman who looked like an older version of myself, with the same dark hair and serious eyes. She was standing next to a man in what appeared to be a hospital setting, both of them wearing scrubs and smiling at the camera. The timestamp on the photo was only 3 weeks old. She remarried, I told Rachel, pointing at the screen, to someone named Carlos Martinez. She looks happy. Rachel peered over my shoulder at the laptop screen. She looks like you. Same smile, same way of tilting her head when she's thinking. I clicked through the few public photos available, searching for any sign that she'd been thinking about me over the years. In one image from what looked like a medical conference, she was wearing a small silver necklace with 2 pendants. I zoomed in, squinting at the screen, and realized they were birthstones. One blue, one pink, December and June, Tyler's birthday and mine. She's been wearing our birthstones, I whispered, feeling tears start to burn behind my eye. All this time Dad's been telling me she didn't want contact, but she's been thinking about us. Finding her contact information took another hour of detective work involving hospital staff directories and professional nursing organization listing. Finally, I had her work email address and a phone number that might or might not be current. I stared at my phone for a long time, trying to figure out what to say to a mother I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. I decided to start with an email, less intrusive than a phone call, and it would give her time to process the contact before deciding how to respond. Dear Mom, I typed, then deleted it. Too formal, Linda. I tried, then deleted that too. Finally, I just started writing. This is Chloe. I don't know if you'll get this email, or if you want to hear from me, but I needed to reach out. Today I learned that Dad has been intercepting your attempts to contact Tyler and me for years. I thought you had abandoned us, but Tyler told me the truth about why you really left. I'm sorry I didn't try to find you sooner. I'm 18 now, and I'm in trouble. Dad tried to kill me today by cutting the brake lines on my car during my driving test. The police are involved, and I'm staying with friends because it's not safe to go home. I don't know what to do or who to trust, but I keep thinking that maybe you would understand. If you want to talk, my phone number is below. If you don't want contact, I understand that too. Either way, I wanted you to know that I never stopped wondering about you. I read the email 3 times before hitting send, then immediately regretted it. What if she really had moved on and didn't want reminders of her previous life? What if Dad had been telling the truth about her starting fresh? What if I was just disrupting her happiness with my problem? My phone rang 6 minutes later, unknown number with a Seattle area code. Chloe? The voice was soft, hesitant, with just a hint of the accent I remembered from childhood lullabies. Oh my God, baby, is this really you? I started crying before I could answer. 5 years of suppressed grief and confusion pouring out in ugly sobs that made it impossible to speak. Rachel rubbed my back while I tried to compose myself enough to respond. Mom, I finally managed. It's really, I've been trying to find you for so long, she said, and I could hear that she was crying too. Your father changed your phone numbers, blocked me on every social media platform you had, returned my letter. I hired a private investigator 2 years ago, but he said David had moved you to a different address, and he couldn't track you down. He never moved us. We're still in the same house on Pine Street. There was a long pause while she processed that information. He told the investigator you'd moved to Portland to live with his sister. He even provided a fake forwarding address. The depth of Dad's deception kept expanding like ripples on water. Not only had he been intercepting Mom's attempts at contact, but he'd been actively feeding false information to professional investigators to ensure she couldn't find us. Chloe, tell me what happened today. Your email said he tried to kill you. I walked through the entire story, from the morning's false reassurances, to the brake failure on the highway, to Jake's discovery of the severed lines. Mom listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of distress or anger. This is exactly what I was afraid of, she said when I finished. When I left, I tried to take you with me, but David had already started laying legal groundwork to prevent that. He'd been documenting every mistake I made, every time I was late picking you up from school, every argument we had. He made it look like I was an unfit mother. Tyler said he sabotaged your car too, multiple times. The first time I thought it was just bad luck. The second time I started to suspect. By the third time I knew it was deliberate, but I couldn't prove it. David's a master mechanic. He knows how to cause failures that look like normal wear and tear. I thought about all the times over the years when Dad had diagnosed car problems for neighbors and friends, always finding solutions that seemed like small miracles. How many of those problems had he caused in the first place? How many people in Cedar Falls had been manipulated by his combination of automotive expertise and calculated sabotage? Mom, I want to see you. Can you come here? Or should I try to get to Seattle? You can't travel alone while he's free, she said immediately. David won't just accept losing control of you. He'll escalate until he's stopped. I'm going to drive down tonight with Carlos. We should be there by morning. The prospect of seeing my mother for the first time in 5 years filled me with a mixture of excitement and terror. What if we couldn't reconnect? What if too much time had passed and we were strangers now? What if she was disappointed in who I'd become under Dad's influence? Chloe, she continued, I need you to be very careful until we get there. David is intelligent and resourceful, and he's had years to plan for this contingency. Don't go anywhere alone, don't trust anyone who might report your location back to him, and don't assume that being in police custody will keep him contained for long. After we hung up, I called Tyler back to tell him about my conversation with Mom. He was still at whatever bar he'd been calling from earlier, but he sounded more sober and alert than before. She's coming here? He asked. Jesus, Chloe, Dad's going to lose his mind when he finds out. Good. Maybe now you'll understand why I can't just go home and pretend this never happened. I'm starting to realize how serious this is, he admitted. I always thought Dad was just overprotective and controlling, but if he really tried to hurt you today, and if he's been sabotaging cars for years. Tyler, you need to be careful too. If Dad's been planning to expand the business using our free labor, and now he's losing me, he might put more pressure on you, or worse, he might blame you for not preventing my escape. There was a long silence while Tyler processed this possibility. I never signed up to be trapped in this town forever, he said finally. I've been going along with Dad's plans because it seemed easier than fighting him. But maybe it's time to make my own decisions. What do you mean? I've had an offer to manage a garage in Portland. Better pay, better opportunities, and far enough from Dad that he couldn't interfere. I turned it down because he convinced me that family loyalty meant staying in Cedar Falls, but now I'm wondering if family loyalty actually means protecting each other from his manipulation. The idea of Tyler finally standing up to Dad's control felt like another small victory in what was starting to feel like a war for our independence. If both his children escaped his influence, maybe Dad would be forced to confront the fact that his methods were destructive rather than protective. Around midnight, Jake Sullivan called to check on how I was holding up. I've been thinking about everything that happened today, he said, and I realized something that might be important. Your dad has been bringing cars to my shop for parts and consultation for about 6 months. Always late at night, always paying cash, always very specific about what he needed. What kind of parts? Brake components, mostly. He said he was stockpiling for busy seasons, but the quantity didn't make sense for the size of his operation. Now I'm wondering if he was practicing, learning different ways to cause brake failures that would look accidental. The implication was chilling, Dad hadn't just sabotaged my car on impulse. He'd been researching and practicing techniques for months, possibly planning for the day when he'd need to stop me from leaving permanently. Jake, did you keep records of those transactions? Of course. Every purchase, every consultation. I'm going to turn all of it over to the police tomorrow. It might help establish premeditation. After Jake hung up, I sat in Rachel's dark bedroom, thinking about the web of evidence that was forming around my father's action. Jake's sales records, Officer Martinez's photographs of the severed brake lines, Tyler's testimony about Dad's interference with my opportunities, and now my mother's testimony about his previous vehicle sabotage. For the first time since the brake failure, I felt like justice might actually be possible. But I also knew that Dad wouldn't give up easily. He'd spent years constructing a version of reality where his control was protection, and his manipulation was love. Losing that control would force him to confront the truth about what he'd become, and people like my father rarely chose self-reflection over escalation. I must have dozed off sometime after 2 in the morning, because I woke up to the sound of gravel crunching in the Kim's drive. Rachel was already awake, peering through her bedroom window into the pre-dawn darkness. "There's a car out there," she whispered, engine running, headlights off. My blood turned to ice water. "Can you see who it is?" "Too dark. Should I wake up my parents?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Come outside, Chloe. We need to talk. Don't involve the Kims in this. Family business should stay in the family." I showed Rachel the message, and she immediately reached for her own phone to call 9. But before she could dial, another message arrived. "I can see you in the window. I know you're reading these. 5 minutes, or I start making noise that will wake up the whole neighborhood. Your choice." The threat was clear. Dad was counting on my desire to protect the Kim family from being dragged deeper into our dysfunction. He knew I wouldn't risk their safety by forcing a confrontation on their property. "I have to go out there," I told Rachel. "Absolutely not. That's exactly what he wants. But if I don't, he'll escalate. He'll do something to draw attention and get the Kims involved. At least if I talk to him, I can control the situation." Rachel grabbed my arm. "Chloe, he tried to kill you 12 hours ago. You cannot trust him to just want to talk." She was right. But I also knew my father well enough to understand that his threats weren't empty. If I didn't comply with his demand for a conversation, he would find a way to force one that would be far more dangerous for everyone involved. I compromised by texting Officer Martinez while moving toward the bedroom door. "Dad's outside Kim house, going to talk to him to protect family. Send backup quietly." Then I walked downstairs and opened the front door, stepping onto the porch but staying close enough to duck back inside if necessary. Dad's truck was indeed parked in the driveway, diesel engine idling quietly. He climbed out slowly, hands visible, moving with the deliberate care of someone who knew he was being watched. "Hello, sweetheart," he said, his voice carrying the same tone he'd used when I was 10 and had disappointed him by breaking something valuable. "I think we need to clear up some misunderstandings." I stepped onto the porch but kept my hand on the door handle, ready to retreat at the first sign of aggressive movement. Dad looked older than he had that morning, his face drawn and his shoulders sagging with exhaustion. The confident mechanic who'd checked my car before the driving test had been replaced by someone who looked cornered and desperate. "Misunderstandings?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dad, you cut my brake lines. I could have died today." He shook his head slowly, as if I were a child who'd gotten confused about a simple situation. "The brake lines were damaged. Yes, but not by me. I think what happened is that when I was checking the car this morning, I accidentally loosened something that was already worn. Old cars have old parts, Chloe. Sometimes they fail at inconvenient times." The lie was so smooth, so reasonable sounding, that for a moment, I almost doubted my own memory. This was the same voice that had explained away every canceled driving test, every missed opportunity, every convenient emergency that had kept me trapped in Cedar Falls. But I'd seen Jake's photographs of those clean cuts. I knew what deliberate sabotage looked like. Jake Sullivan documented everything, I said. The police have photographs showing that the brake lines were cut with professional tools. This wasn't an accident or normal wear. Dad's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something darker crossing his features before the concerned father mask slipped back into place. Jake Sullivan has always resented our family's success in this town. His father's garage never could compete with Parker Auto Repair, and now Jake's looking for any excuse to damage our reputation. Our reputation? Dad, you tried to murder me rather than let me get my driver's license. Don't be dramatic, sweetheart. I would never hurt you. Everything I've done has been to protect you from making mistakes you'll regret later. The word protect triggered something in my memory. How many times had I heard that justification over the years? Protection from the marine biology internship that would have interfered with family time. Protection from college prep programs that would have put pressure on me. Protection from friendships with kids whose families might give me ideas about leaving Cedar Falls. The way you protected Mom? I asked. Dad went very still. The night sounds of Cedar Falls seemed to amplify around us. Distant traffic, a dog barking 3 blocks away, the hum of electrical transformers. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its artificially gentle tone. What did Tyler tell you? Everything. About how you sabotaged Mom's car to prevent her from taking me. About how you've been intercepting her attempts to contact us for 5 years. About how you lied to investigators to keep her from finding us. Your mother was unstable, Dad said flatly. She wanted to drag you away from your family, your home, everything you'd ever known. I saved you from that chaos. You separated me from my mother and then spent 5 years convincing me she'd abandoned us willingly. I did what was necessary to keep this family together. The casual admission of years of manipulation and emotional abuse hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't even trying to deny it anymore. In his mind, controlling and lying to his children was not only justified, but admirable. Behind me, I heard the soft creak of the front door opening. Rachel appeared beside me, flanked by both her parents. Mr. Kim was holding what looked like a baseball bat, while Mrs. Kim had her phone out, presumably with 911 already dialed. Mr. Parker, Mrs. Kim said firmly, I think you should leave now. Chloe doesn't want to talk to you. Dad's gaze shifted to the Kim family, and I saw him calculating. 3 adults, 1 teenage girl, 1 house full of potential witnesses. This wasn't the isolated confrontation he'd been hoping for. This is a private family matter, he said. Chloe, get in the truck. We're going home to sort this out properly. I'm not going anywhere with you. Yes, you are. The mask finally slipped completely, revealing the controlling manipulation that had defined my entire childhood. You're 17 years old, which means you're still a minor under my custody. These people are harboring a runaway, which is a crime. Mr. Kim stepped forward. Actually, Mr. Parker, Chloe is 18 as of last month. She's legally an adult who can choose where she wants to stay. I saw Dad's jaw clench as he realized that particular avenue of control had been closed off. My 18th birthday had passed quietly in April, celebrated with a small dinner at home and a gift card to the bookstore. At the time, I'd been disappointed by the low-key celebration. Now I realized Dad had probably been dreading the day I gained legal independence. Chloe, he said, switching tactics, think about what you're doing. You're throwing away your family, your future, everything we've built together, because of one misunderstanding. Is that really what you want? What I want is to go to college. What I want is to have relationships with people you don't control. What I want is to make my own choices about my life. And you think running away will give you those things. You think cutting yourself off from your family will make you independent. You're going to end up exactly like your mother, alone, struggling, full of regrets. The psychological manipulation was so practiced, so automatic, that I could see how it had worked for years. Dad had perfected the art of making his control seem like protection, and his victim's desire for independence seem like selfish betrayal. My mother isn't alone, I said. She remarried. She has a career she loves. She seems happy in the photos I found of her. Maybe leaving you was the best decision she ever made. That hit home. Dad's face darkened, and for a moment I saw the rage that had probably driven him to cut my brake lines. The fury of a man who couldn't accept that the people he controlled might actually be better off without him. Your mother filled your head with lies, he said. Just like these people are doing now. You're not thinking clearly, Chloe. You're upset and confused, and you're making decisions that will destroy your future. Headlights swept across the Kim's front yard as a police cruiser turned into the driveway. Officer Martinez stepped out, one hand resting casually on her service weapon, her posture alert, but not aggressive. Mr. Parker, she said, I thought you were going to stay available for questioning. I came to check on my daughter, Dad replied, his voice shifting back to the reasonable concerned father tone. She's been through a traumatic experience, and I wanted to make sure she's okay. Your daughter has made it clear that she doesn't want contact with you. I'm going to need you to leave this property immediately. Officer, with all due respect, this is a family matter. Chloe is upset about her accident today, and she's not thinking clearly. I just want to take her home where she'll be safe. Officer Martinez looked at me. Chloe, do you want to go with your father? Absolutely not, I said. He tried to kill me today, and I'm afraid of what he'll do if I'm alone with him. Dad's expression shifted to hurt confusion, as if my fear was completely unreasonable. Sweetheart, you know I would never hurt you. This whole situation has gotten blown out of proportion. Mr. Parker, Officer Martinez said, based on the evidence we've collected and the statements we've taken, you're going to be formally charged tomorrow morning with attempted vehicular homicide, criminal mischief, and reckless endangerment. I strongly advise you to contact a lawyer and avoid any further contact with potential witnesses. Potential witnesses? Officer, you're treating this like some kind of conspiracy when it's clearly just a mechanical failure that happened at an unfortunate time. A mechanical failure that involved brake lines cut with professional precision. Mr. Parker, you need to leave now. Dad looked around the circle of faces. Officer Martinez with her hand near her weapon, the Kim family standing protectively around me, Rachel recording everything on her phone. His control of the situation was slipping away, and I could see him struggling to find a new angle of attack. This isn't over, Chloe, he said, finally. You're going to realize that you've made a terrible mistake, and when you do, I'll be waiting to help you fix it. Because that's what family does. He climbed back into his truck and drove away slowly, deliberately, making sure everyone understood that he was leaving by choice rather than being forced out. The threat in his final words hung in the air like exhaust fumes. Are you okay? Officer Martinez asked me. I nodded, though my hands were shaking with adrenaline. He's not going to give up, even if you arrest him, even if he goes to prison, he's going to keep trying to control my life. We'll do everything we can to protect you, she said. But you're right that this is probably just the beginning. Men like your father don't surrender control easily. The next few hours passed in a blur of police reports, witness statements and phone calls. Tyler arrived around 3 in the morning, looking shaken and confused. I've been thinking about everything you said, he told me. About Dad's plans for the business. About how he's been manipulating us. I called that garage in Portland. The management position is still available if I want it. Are you going to take it? I think I have to. After tonight, after seeing how he talked to you, I can't pretend this is normal family behavior anymore. At dawn, a rental car pulled into the Kim's driveway. I watched through the living room window as a woman I barely remembered stepped out of the passenger seat. She was shorter than I'd expected, her dark hair streaked with early gray, but her smile was exactly as I remembered from childhood. My mother walked up the driveway slowly, as if she were afraid I might disappear if she moved too quick. When I opened the front door, we stood looking at each other for a long moment, 5 years of separation stretching between us like a chasm. You look so grown up, she said softly. Then we were hugging, and she smelled like hospital antiseptic and vanilla perfume, and I was crying again, but this time from relief instead of fear. Behind her, a tall man with kind eyes and graying temples extended his hand. You must be Chloe, he said. I'm Carla. Your mom has been talking about you for years. Over breakfast at the Kim's kitchen table, Mom and I began the slow process of rebuilding a relationship that Dad had spent 5 years destroying. She told me about her new life in Seattle, about her work at the hospital, about the continuing education classes she was taking to become a nurse practitioner. Carlos added details about their house near Lake Washington, about the guest room they'd set up in case Tyler or I ever wanted to visit. "I want you to know," Mom said, "that leaving you behind was the hardest thing I've ever done." But David had lawyers, and he had documentation of every mistake I'd made as a mother. He convinced a judge that I was unstable and that taking you away from your home environment would be traumatic. "Were you unstable?" She considered the question carefully. "I was unhappy. David's need to control every aspect of our lives was suffocating me, and I was starting to fight back in ways that probably did look erratic to outside observers. But I was never a danger to you or Tyler. I was just a woman trying to escape an abusive marriage." Carlos reached over and squeezed her hand. "Your mother spent 2 years in therapy learning to trust her own perceptions again." David had convinced her that her desire for independence was selfishness, and her instinct to protect you was paranoia. The psychological mechanics of Dad's abuse were becoming clearer as Mom described her experience. He'd isolated her from friends and family, convinced her that her perceptions were unreliable, and then used her resulting confusion as evidence that she was unstable. It was a systematic dismantling of her confidence and autonomy that had taken years to accomplish and years more to recover from. "I should have fought harder," she said. "I should have found a way to take you with me." "You couldn't have known how far he would go," I replied. "Even I didn't understand what he was capable of until yesterday." Around noon, Officer Martinez called with an update. "Your father has been formally charged and arraigned. He posted bail, but there's a restraining order in place that prohibits him from contacting you or coming within 500 feet of any location where you're staying." "What does that mean for his business?" "Well, if Jake Sullivan's evidence about the brake parts purchases holds up, and if we can establish a pattern of premeditation, your father is looking at serious prison time. The business will probably have to be sold to pay for legal fees." The irony wasn't lost on me. Dad had sabotaged my car to prevent me from leaving, and potentially undermining his business expansion plans. Instead, his actions had guaranteed that both his children would leave Cedar Falls and that Parker Auto Repair would be destroyed. That afternoon, Jake Sullivan stopped by the Kim house to check on me and provide an update on his cooperation with the police investigation. "I turned over all the sales records from your father's late-night visits," he said. "The pattern is pretty clear. He was researching different methods of brake failure over several months." "Jake, can I ask you something? When you were examining my car this morning, did you suspect sabotage right away?" He shook his head. "Honestly, my first thought was mechanical failure. It wasn't until I saw how clean those cuts were that I realized someone had done it deliberately, and even then I hoped there might be some other explanation." "Why?" "Because the alternative was that your own father had tried to kill you. That's not the kind of thing you want to believe about someone you've known your whole life." The next few days passed in a strange suspension between my old life and whatever came next. Mom and Carlos extended their stay in Cedar Falls to help me pack my belongings and prepare for the move to Seattle. Tyler gave his notice at Parker Auto Repair and accepted the Portland position, effectively ending 3 generations of Parker family involvement in the business. The local newspaper picked up the story, and suddenly everyone in Cedar Falls had an opinion about David Parker and his family. Some people defended him, claiming the charges were exaggerated, and that family disputes shouldn't involve the police. Others came forward with their own stories of suspicious car troubles that had coincidentally benefited Parker Auto Repair's business. Mrs. Chin from the flower shop mentioned that her transmission had failed the day before she planned to drive to Portland for her daughter's wedding, forcing her to hire local transportation. Mr. Rodriguez from the hardware store recalled that his brakes had mysteriously started squealing just before a big family vacation, leading to an expensive repair job at Parker's shop. The more people talked, the clearer it became that Dad had been using his mechanical expertise to create problems he could then solve for profit. On Thursday morning, Rachel and I drove to the DMV to reschedule my driving test. The same woman who'd processed my paperwork the previous Tuesday looked confused when she saw my name. "Didn't you already take your test?" I remember checking you in. It didn't go well, I said, which was technically true. Jake was working his DMV shift that day, and he volunteered to be my examiner again. Let's finish what we started, he said with a smile. This time I drove my mother's rental car, which had functional brakes and no hidden sabotage. The test route was identical to the one we'd attempted earlier in the week, but everything felt different. I was no longer the naive girl who trusted her father's mechanical expertise. I was someone who'd survived attempted murder and found the courage to rebuild her life. The parallel parking went perfectly. The highway merging was smooth and confident. When we returned to the DMV parking lot, Jake turned to me with a grin. Congratulations, Chloe. I stared at the temporary license he handed me. This small piece of paper that represented so much more than driving privileges. It was proof that I'd escaped my father's control, that I could make my own decisions, that the future was mine to choose. 2 weeks later, I was enrolled in community college classes in Seattle, living in Mom and Carlos's guest room while I figured out my next steps. Tyler had started his new job in Portland, and called regularly to share updates about his own journey toward independence. Parker Auto Repair was up for sale, with no buyers interested in taking over a business associated with criminal charges. Dad was awaiting trial, maintaining his innocence, and claiming that the entire case was a conspiracy orchestrated by jealous competitors and an ungrateful daughter. I'd blocked his phone number and his email address, but occasionally his attempts to contact me still got through. The messages always followed the same pattern: hurt confusion about my accusations, gentle reminders of everything he'd done for me over the years, and subtle threats about what would happen if I continued to cooperate with the prosecution. I saved every message as evidence for the trial. On a sunny Saturday morning in September, I was helping Mom plant bulbs in her garden when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I recognized the Cedar Falls area code. Chloe? The voice was hesitant. Female, definitely not Dad. This is Madison, my younger sister. I'd been wondering when she would reach out. Madison was only 15, still living at home, still under Dad's direct influence. I'd been afraid that he would turn her against me completely. Madison, hi, are you okay? I'm scared, she said quietly. Dad's been different since you left. Angry. He keeps talking about how you and Tyler betrayed the family, how ungrateful kids these days don't understand loyalty. Are you safe? Has he hurt you? Not physically, but he's watching everything I do now. He checks my phone, he drives me to school instead of letting me take the bus, he won't let me go anywhere after school. It's like he's afraid I'm going to disappear too. I felt a familiar surge of protective anger. Dad was taking out his frustration about losing control of Tyler and me by tightening his grip on Madison. She was becoming the sole focus of all his manipulation and control. Madison, listen to me. You're not stuck there forever. In 3 years, you'll be 18, and legally free to make your own choices. Until then, document everything. Keep records of how he treats you, save any threatening messages, and stay connected with friends and teachers who can serve as witnesses if you need help. Can I come visit you in Seattle when you're 18? Absolutely. Before then it would require Dad's permission, and I don't think he's going to agree to that. We talked for almost an hour about her school plans, her friends, her dreams of studying art in college. She was smart and creative, and deserved the same chance at independence that Tyler and I had fought for. Knowing that she was still trapped in that house, still subject to Dad's psychological manipulation, made my escape feel incomplete. But I also knew that everyone had to find their own path to freedom. I could offer Madison support and advice, but ultimately she would have to make her own choice about when and how to break free from Dad's control. The trial was scheduled for November. I would have to return to Cedar Falls to testify, to face my father in court, and tell the world what he'd done to our family. The prospect terrified me, but I also felt ready for it. I had evidence, I had allies, and most importantly, I had the truth. 3 months ago, I'd been a scared teenager, who thought her biggest problem was passing a driving test. Now I was a survivor who'd escaped attempted murder and found the courage to rebuild her life on her own terms. My father had tried to destroy my future to preserve his control, but instead, He'd given me the strength to create something better than anything he could have planned. I still had nightmares about brake failure and highway crash. I still flinched when I heard diesel engines that sounded like Dad's truck, but I also had my driver's license, my mother's love, and a future that belonged to me. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be destroyed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.